Hello, this is Erica with Launching Legacies. Welcome to our daily devotional. We are continuing an extended devotional on the applications from biblical stories or biblical people. And today we're going to look at Malachi. So, Malachi is a prophet. I said we would spend time on looking at all the prophets and applications from their lives. So, let's look at Malachi. Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. Okay, so he's the last prophet that's mentioned in the Old Testament before we start the New Testament. He's also a minor prophet. So the prophets are divided into two different categories. There are major prophets and minor prophets. He is a minor prophet, and he is at the end of the Old Testament. His name, Malachi, means messenger. So you should know these things as we get started. Now, here goes the thing about the prophets, okay? The Old Testament prophets had, not only were they divided between major and minor, but they all had very difficult jobs, okay? And I want to explain why that's the case. Because what they had to do, what they were asked to do, was basically get most of the time, a disobedient people to kind of come in the direction that the Lord was trying to bring them in. And that's not easy because people don't like someone coming and bossing them around and telling them what God is telling them to do especially when they're doing wrong. And by and large, that is the largest theme of both the major and minor prophets, is that the people were doing whatever they wanted to do, and the prophets were sent to be messengers at a time where the people were being disobedient or difficult. Sometimes when the people were having a hard time, like they were in a famine or they were in captivity. So there's a lot of different dynamics to the different prophets, which is why we're going to get an application from each of their lives. Now, mind you, some of the prophets is very straightforward and simple, and so their application is pretty much the same, but we can find an application from each of their stories, and now you'll learn a little bit about it. So again, this prophet's name is Malachi. Malachi means messenger. Okay, and he is the last of the minor prophets in the Old Testament. Okay, now, and actually I haven't looked at it chronologically, so I'll tell you tomorrow after I look at one of my other timeline books whether how they go chronologically. I'll try to do them chronologically, but I started with Malachi because Malachi means messenger, and prophecy actually means message from God. So we want to understand that what the prophets do is speak the word or the truths of God and to the people. Okay, so what about Malachi do we need to know? Well, for one, Malachi is a short book. It only has 4 chapters. And the 4th is extremely small. And so if you have heard the name Malachi or heard scriptures from the book of Malachi, you probably heard scriptures about offering, because that's the most common passages from Malachi that I hear often in church settings or amongst Christians, is the rules about tithing. And so the rules of tithing are in Malachi, the 3rd chapter. They're pretty much the entire chapter. And he's telling them, you forgot to tithe, like you forgot to do this correctly. And so you need to remember to give things to the storehouse. Remember to give a tithe to the house of God. And so we hear Malachi a lot in that context, but really it's not so much out of context when we're hearing it. So I want to talk more about what's happening in the book of Malachi. So in the book of Malachi, he's talking to the children of Israel, but here goes the dilemma. He deals with 2 different people. He talks about Israel in general. Okay, he talks about the priests, and then he talks about Judah, and then he goes back into talking about the ways that people have been disobedient, and all of them have an era of disobedience in it. And so he talks about judgment. God talks about judgment, and then mercy, and then he ends talking about the day of the Lord. Okay, and so intermixed in there has to do with different things that the people are supposed to be doing that they're no longer doing. So there's like a falling away, and it starts with God loves Israel, and he's saying, look, I loved you. I've been taking care of you. I've been doing the right thing. Now, remember, this is Malachi. He's writing this book, but he's also delivering this message to the people. And he's like, look, I've been taking care of you. I loved you, Israel. You're my people, and I love you. You're dear to me. And what have you been doing? Like, how have you been treating me? And so he starts with this kind of moment of conviction where he's saying to Israel, what have you been doing to me? How have you been treating me? How have you been endearing me? How have you been respecting or regarding me? Like, I have a question for you, because I'm confused as to how I have loved you so dearly and you have been like this to me. And he kind of brings in there some of the contempt that Israel has for God. And he's like, look, you think that God is, you think that God is, well, he's speaking on behalf of God. So he's like, you think that God is kind of dishonoring you, or he doesn't care about you, or you think that what you've done is enough, but you kind of slighted me. You treated me like like someone who is irrelevant. You haven't worried about what was important to me. You haven't honored what was valuable to me. You haven't done what we agreed on doing. And then he moves to the priest, and it's even worse. He's like, and you won't even give the things that I told you to give. So the priests were in charge of giving a particular type of offering, a certain type of animal for a certain type of offering. These types of things were the custom at the time, which would be animal offerings for sin. But what he says in here, what he accuses them of, is that they were giving sick animals, right? Instead of giving the best animal, which would be worth a lot of money at the time, because remember, this is a agricultural or farm-based, culture. And so we're talking about animals, and food would be the commodities that would be valuable. And so what they gave was sick animals. Okay, so when they give a sacrifice to God, they give the animal that they couldn't get any money for, or that they didn't have any value for. And God didn't ask for the sick animal, of course. He asked for them to give a sacrifice, because the whole point of the tithe and the sacrifice and the giving to God was to say that we know that you've given us these things, and so we want to honor you with it. But they weren't doing that. They weren't honoring God. They were giving him kind of like the sideline, whatever they had left over that they didn't have any use for. And their contempt was risen. And he says, but you want to ask me questions like, well, haven't I done what you said? Or didn't I do what you asked? And it's becoming a problem, because you do what I asked, but only in the way that's convenient for you. You do what I said, but only in the way that makes you happy. You only give me whatever it is that you feel like you want to give me. Everything else is kind of, you throw me to the side. And so God has a problem with that. And so he's kind of confronting the priest, and he's like, you guys aren't right. You guys haven't been doing the things that you said you were going to be doing. You haven't been treating me the way you're supposed to be treating. And so he goes through the passage, kind of talking about that. He talks about a time of judgment. He's like, there's going to be a time where we're going to give account for these things, because you clearly don't understand that I'm serious about what I've said. I loved you and I've taken care of you, but you're going to have to account for the decisions that you've made. And so he says that. And then he talks about the tithe, and he talks about giving the 10% and why the 10% is given. And basically he says that there may be meat in my house, that my things will be taken care of, because how can I minister to you unless someone ministers to me? And so we know that the tithe is important, and that comes up. We see the establishment of the tithe earlier in the Old Testament, but definitely is reiterated here, and the people haven't been doing that. And God calls them robbers, or he calls them thieves. And he says, look, just bring the tithe into bring the tithe into the temple, and which he calls my house, and test me in it. See if I won't do what I said I'll do. But I need you to value what I value. I need you to give back to me what I know is a sacrifice for you, because you know where it came from. And so that's what he's trying to get these people to do. And it's kind of a contentious conversation. It doesn't ever really turn into a really beautiful one, except for when he starts talking about God, his promise of mercy. And so then he promises mercy. He's like, look, I'll be merciful to you. There'll be a time where judgment is going to come, but I will be good to you. I'll be merciful to you. I'll be kind to you. And I want you to know that I regarded you with love, and I've regarded you with good things. And so I'm going to give you mercy when I have decided for mercy. But he says, but be mindful that the day of judgment is coming. Like, this stuff will have an end. In other words, don't think we're going to placate this forever and ever and ever and ever. No, I got a time in which I'm going to bring myself back into the end of what I began, and that's going to be the day of judgment, in which all men will receive the judgment according to what they deserve. Now we know that Christ has come and giving us mercy where we would have found judgment, and that's beautiful. But I want to read from you in this passage. It says, You have said it is useless to serve God. It did no good to obey his laws and to show the Lord all powerful that we were sorry for what we did. So we say that proud people are happy. Evil people succeed. They challenge God and get away with it. Then those who honored the Lord spoke with each other, and the Lord listened and heard them. And the names of those who honored the Lord and respected him were written in the presence in the book to be remembered. And the Lord all-powerful says, they belong to me. On that day, they will be my very own. As a parent shows mercy to his child, so who serves him, I will show mercy to my people. Okay. And so God talks about, look, you haven't treated me well because you felt like other people are prospering despite their wickedness and their evilness. So basically you join the evil. He says, but there's going to be a rising up of people who will say that God is still good. There'll be people who will say that God is righteous. They'll say that God is to be honored. They'll say that he's worthy. And when those people rise up, I shall be the parent to them, and I will have mercy on them, and they will be with me, and they will stay with me. And that's the mercy statement. And then he talks about the day of judgment, when the Lord will return. But here goes the thing. The application from Malachi is this. After we've go through the whole story, the application from Malachi is this. Malachi was trying to urge the people to take God seriously. He was trying to urge them to not just be doing what they've been typically doing, but giving half-heartedly this, half-heartedly that. Oh, I don't care about this. I'll do this, whatever. It doesn't matter. I'll just give them this. He was trying to get them away from those behaviors and those attitudes because they were kind of resentment. They had contempt against God. Resentful. They had contempt against God, and they really wanted to kind of push to the area of doing whatever they wanted to do, but still say they were obeying. God doesn't want us to be those kind of people. And of course, this would have been a difficult message for Malachi to deliver. But what about if he was delivering it to you? Would it be hard for you to receive? Are we having contempt towards God and the things that he's asked us to do? Now, again, we don't live in the Old Testament, and we don't live by the regulations of the Old Testament to that regard, right? That Jesus fulfilled the law. And so although there are some things in the law that we definitely need to adhere to because they align with the character of God, we're not legalistic. But God has likely asked you to do something. You feel that you have a responsibility to respond to God in worship, in love, in character, and in deed, in sacrifice, and giving in some way. Have you been able to adhere to that, or have you been half-heartedly doing whatever he's asked? Because that's the issue that Malachi is addressing. He's like, look, God has loved you. Why haven't you loved him? Why haven't you obeyed him in love? And so it's calling us out. I'm praying for you. I hope that you're praying for Launching Legacies. And we are going to continue our extended application of stories or applications from the prophets, the minor and major prophets. But I want to tell you this. You can read this book in, a few moments because it's only a few chapters. But will you apply the truths to your heart? And will you sincerely think about how sincerely you actually worship God? How do we honor him? Because he's going to have mercy on us, sure. But he also wants us to know that he's recognizing us when we're being insincere. We want to be insincere to a good and loving God because he's good to us. All right, we're done for today, but we'll see you tomorrow with another of our devotional. Until then, be blessed.